All right. Good Sunday morning. How's everybody doing? So, crazy times in the world, and we've got a full moon coming in tomorrow. It's going to hit right at about Pacific time, 8:48 p.m. in the evening. So, depending on where you're at, if you're Central Time, Eastern Time, or on the other side of the world, extrapolate accordingly. But, this every 2 weeks we get a full moon. It's not like the end of the world or any earth-shattering thing, but it's very powerful because it's bringing a lot of things forward. And it's interesting. I was looking at the comments here just before I came on, and I thought, someone asked me about the three-eye atlas. This is this comet that's coming in. I don't know if anybody's heard about it, but there's this comet that they've been tracking. And even Elon Musk came out and said, this thing looks like a cylinder. It looks like something that's not, a natural phenomena. So I figured, well, just before I jumped on, like 2 minutes before I jumped on, I cast a chart and I looked at it and I said, okay, well, what does this chart say? And again, for anybody not familiar, I use interrogation astrology. Also in the East, they call it prashna. It's literally asking a question. And I find it's probably one of the most reliable types of astrology. You may not get 1,000% of everything you want to know without analyzing it in great detail. And I've only looked at this chart now for maybe 3 minutes. I literally cast it 3 minutes before I got on this podcast. And I have to say, it does look nefarious. It doesn't look good. The moon was just separating from a trine to Jupiter and now going to a conjunction of Saturn. Plain English, anytime you see a Moon-Saturn conjunction, it's not your best news. So, and again, we've got a lot of things going on, and I always like to be positive and look at the positive side of things. But I find interrogation is one of the most interesting types of astrology because, when astrologers do reading, including myself, we're always looking at energies. We're looking at timing and what's happening in a person's life and what phases they're in. But what's so unique about prashna or interrogation, some astrologers know it as horary, it's absolutely phenomenal because you're literally looking at a specific question. And I have literally tens of thousands of these things I've done over the last 40, 45 years. Some of the stuff was back in the 80s. I don't even have records of it anymore. But it's pretty amazing. And this looks like it's definitely, in fact, I'm going to go back and look at this. Just take a minute. I don't want to take too much time while I'm on a podcast, but I reserve the right to study these. I've actually found studying an interrogation chart can take a lot of time depending on the complexity. And a lot of people are in a hurry. They just want the answer. Tell me yes or no, right? And you can usually get that, but I find you have to study these things sometimes up to a half an hour, and sometimes I even come back to them a day later. And it's an amazing thing because it's proving the universe is an interactive consciousness. In other words, think about that. You're asking a question. And I could go on and on at how many times I've had people ask me questions and I would just read the chart and they'd come back and say, wow, it was right on. The only time I've ever seen it wrong is if I didn't spend the time, the quality time to really pick it apart. But this one is interesting. I'm looking up at my screen right now. And see, the moon is going to a conjunction of Saturn. So this in some ways might not be a good omen. And I've heard a lot of people say, that there's all kinds of opinions out there on the internet as to what it is. I would tend to say with the eclipse point, meaning K2 at the midheaven, and the moon going to a conjunction of Saturn, this is probably not a good energy. I don't think it's going to hit Earth. A lot of people have said, oh, you think it'll collide with Earth? No, I don't think it will. And the astronomers, from everything I've heard, said no. And, but I would tend to say this forebodes a few things. That's kind of what I was getting to in the last few podcasts. If you take this all up to 100,000 feet and you look down, you could say what we're seeing right now with the unrest in the world. And I'm not just hearing this in the United States. Of course, we've got all this stuff going on in Portland, Chicago. New York's about ready to go full communist or socialism. And, we've got a lot of dissension and unrest throughout the world. Again, we've got the judges blocking the National Guard. There's all kinds of dissension between the government. The government is shut down. By the way, I did cast another interrogation on that this morning. I figured I'd watch the news this morning, the mind control news, right? And just see, what was going on. And I listened to John Thune, who was talking about, whether or not this shutdown is going to resolve anytime soon. Well, I actually cast an interrogation on that as well. And I don't think it's going to shut down soon. And, this is not the first time this has happened. It's happened many times before. I think the longest one was back in the first Trump administration back in 2018. It went on for 35 days. We're only 5 days into this one. And I think from what I could see in the interrogation, this is going to be really aggressive. And Trump is probably going to be cutting a lot more programs because the Democrats have actually given him the power to do that. Now, I don't like getting into politics, and I'm not getting into politics because I don't want to get into, who hates Trump, who likes Trump, and all that stuff. I'm just reading the astrology. So let's be really clear on that. I don't want to get into politics. But I can see that this thing is probably going to go on for a while. And I wouldn't be surprised if it comes close or even surpasses the last 35-day shutdown. This also happened during the Clinton administration, way back in 1995, 96. It happened for almost 21 days. It also happened during the Obama administration. And I don't know, I didn't go much back farther than that. It could have happened, God only knows, in the last 250 years before. But I know this one, the interrogation, don't look good. I don't think you're going to get a compromise here between the Democrats and the Republicans. There might be a few more Democrats that come across the line. I think eventually it's going to resolve. But again, I didn't have time to really pick apart. And timing is a really hard thing to get in interrogation, prashna, or horary, whichever one you want to call it. It's not easy to get timing. But I can tell you the signs were fixed on all the angles. And when I cast it, there was a moon trine Jupiter. So it will resolve. It's just not going to be right away. That's what I get. So, and it also looked like there's going to be more trouble in the United States and in other places of the world. Of course, look at what we've got going on. You got Hamas and Israel trying to settle this peace agreement. I think they'll come to a somewhat close compromise, but I don't know that it's going to be a cut and dry deal. I hope it is, but from what I can see in the chart, it may continue on, and let's hope it doesn't escalate. And again, not to mention the stuff that's going on in Europe. There's riots in the UK right now. You've got people literally getting locked up and being put in prison for First Amendment speech rights like we have here in the United States. And I hear Ireland's rioting. And again, I've talked to the people down in Australia. That's brewing. I don't know exactly where that's at right now. But this is all dovetailing back to what I've been talking about. Uranus, which goes around the solar system about every 84 to 86 years, it's not exact, but close to that, is going to a conjunction back over the Pleiades of Alcyon first. And remember, the Pleiades is a star cluster group that is in the sidereal sign of Taurus. And you can see right in the center here, Alcyon is a very powerful star. In fact, many of the ancients said that Alcyon might be the central star, which our solar system goes around. Now, that's been disputed by a lot of astronomers, and I don't want to get into that one, but it's a very significant star. And if you get back into the ancient lore of the Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, and the Vedas, they all felt that that star had the nature of Moon and Mars. Well, what is that all about, right? Moon and Mars, if you don't know what that means, I can tell you it means dissension. It means anger or frustration over current situations. Now, you bring Uranus over that kind of energy. That's like throwing a grenade in the room, and this is exactly what we're seeing. You're seeing this polarization here between different parties here, which of course in the United States is Republican, Democrat, but you're seeing it in other countries too. A lot of dissension and rising up against suppression. So, and again, this whole situation with ICE removing the immigrants and the governors going against it, we're seeing a massive polarization here that I think is going to continue to escalate. And eventually, again, I heard in Oregon, the Supreme Court had just blocked Trump from being able to put in the National Guard. Now we'll see where that goes on overturning it. I didn't look at it. But the bottom line I'm trying to say here is that the astrology in the world's being mirrored by this Uranus coming back retrograde. Remember, Uranus just went retrograde right at the first part of this month, and it is now going back over that fixed star Alcyon. Again, plain English, throwing a grenade in the room. Kaboom, right? So things go into dissension. And remember, Uranus will station, turn around, and come back over this next spring. So this is the big background theme that nobody seems to be mentioning much. I don't know why, but it's a very powerful energy. And you really, when you look at astrology, you have to say, okay, what's the topographical background energy? And then you move in to the lunations, which is the new and the full moons and the aspects. And they stir the pot and kind of are the straws that end up on the camel's back. Well, one of the things we've got going on, and this is going to happen right around the 20th of October, and it's a Mercury-Mars conjunction. Now, you might say, what does that mean? Well, the fur will fly on that one. That's, we always used to call Mercury-Mars aspects the Bickerfest aspect, meaning people bicker or they fight or negotiations get really intense. And this might bring to fore a lot more intensity going on with what's happening in our government and in other places of the world, even though it's a brief aspect, very powerful. And again, Mercury is always going to station sooner or later, does it 3 times a year, and stations and goes retrograde in November. So this is kind of a setup here for a lot of powerful energy that's going to come. Remember, the Uranus conjunction to that fixed star Alcyon happens right at about the 29th of October this month, coming right up. So a lot of powerful stuff. So, a lot of people are saying here, the crazy times. Yeah, I agree with that one. So, yeah, and also, too, I'm so glad somebody just, Lynn Davis just mentioned here, lots of UFO sightings over Europe right now. Not only Europe, let me show you this one. This is something that was spotted right over Arizona. And you could see, these rings here. And I have to concur. I'll tell you, there's been a lot of talk over the years that the military has been very knowledgeable about extraterrestrial life. And I know in the 70s, my uncle gave me a really powerful telescope. It was a really cool telescope. It had a nice wooden tripod, very solid, very stable, because the more magnification you get, the more the vibration matters, right? So I used to sit down on the lakeshore. We lived way up in the woods just south of a little town called Sainer, Wisconsin. So you had dark night sky, no city lights up there. I mean, at night when you drove, if you didn't have headlights in your car, you weren't going to see unless it was a moonlit night. So I had excellent visibility with telescopes. And of course, you can only get so far with the atmosphere. But I used to plot all these different UFOs that were football shaped. Some were triangular shaped. I'd actually watch them go down in the woods. And pretty interesting stuff. I had a motorcycle actually stopped. I think it was about 1975-ish, something like that. I had a motorcycle shut down. No electricity at all. Next morning, I came back, started right up. And I saw a craft, me and a guy that let me put my motorcycle at his house, saw that same craft going down. So, this is nothing new. I can't tell you how many times I have been in the Southwest here on the 8 interstate, which is between Tucson and San Diego. And late at night, I'd pull over, and rest for something. And I'd look up and see stuff shooting across the sky. And again, a lot of paranormal phenomena that has gone on. So, yeah, they're seeing it all over the globe from what I'm hearing. And clearly, we've been lied to, right? I don't believe that we've been hearing the truth out of the government reports. They've always obfuscated swamp gas from Venus, right? And that's an interesting thing. But I can tell you the amount of paranormal phenomena I have seen in that area in my lifetime is stunning. Just recently, I was riding the motorcycle down the PCH before the fires out there. in Palisades, and I saw a cylindrical object pointing right down. It couldn't have been much more than 200-300 feet in the air, and I couldn't keep my eye on it because I was going by at highway speeds. And but I've seen so much stuff out there. I've actually heard psychically they read my energy, and pretty wild stuff. So, and again, there's been reports that there's this huge base underneath the ocean out there in between Zuma Beach and Santa Barbara. It's right off the coast. And it used to be on Google. They took it off. So, but interesting stuff. So anyways, yeah. So people are making a lot of good comments here. And yeah, so well, I'm just kind of keeping up with my comments. I'm actually putting them on the screen. You could probably see this over here, so I can keep a little bit better track of what people are asking, because it's hard when I get talking to pay full attention at these. But yeah, I would say that a lot of energies here are winding up this month, and this full moon just brings it kind of to a peak. You know, and every month we're going to have a new moon. 2 weeks later, you're going to have a full moon, and you get the quarters on each week after the full moon, approximately, right? So this is always the energy stirring the pot. I had someone give me an interesting post about how the moon was involved with Saturn in the imprisonment of the soul in these incarnations on this earth. And, you know, I think there might be some truth to that the earth is a place where the soul comes to grow and experience with free will. And, you know, it actually makes me go back and read these texts, like I had mentioned, the Sharia Gilgam, which is an absolutely amazing text. I got that in here somewhere, and I mentioned that text an awful lot. It's a pretty interesting text here. I'll put it on the screen just in case anybody hasn't heard me mention that. But that there you can see is the Sharia Gilgam. And I'll put it larger here so people can see. There you go. So Sharar means gate, and Hagilgam means cycling of the soul. Now, this was actually a rabbinical text that was put out, I think, somewhere in the 14th century. I could be wrong on the century. But what I like about this is the humility at what it's written like. You know, most religions will tell you this is the way it is, right? Well, the guy who wrote this was actually a man named Rabbi Luria, who was a profound person who contributed to many Kabbalistic documents, if people are familiar with the so-called Kabbalah, right? And which is really just secret knowledge. And this was the work that his teacher, the Ari, had showed him. The Ari was a man who was born physically blind, could not see out of his eyes, but he could see the soul. And this book is a very structured book about the soul and how it goes through this process of reincarnation and also conscious ascension and dissipation of karmas, which fits like a glove with Vedic and Nadi astrology. And the Vedas talk about this too. It's not as explicit as this document. So this document is very much rooted in the rabbinical texts, but it's quite profound. And I've never seen anything quite as explicit in detail and structure as this. And again, I always use these diagrams, which I'll show you here. Now, I think I can do that. Let me see if I go to the share of the screen. Yeah. So I actually have it up, and I use this diagram almost every podcast. And the reason I do is it's such a good diagram. It just really works. This is, a lot of people have asked me, hey, where'd you get this diagram, and can I get a copy? This is something I started probably 38 years ago, maybe almost 40 years ago now. I don't know if it's been that long, but it's been pretty long. And because I would always study these different ancient texts out of Egypt, out of the Kabbalah, out of, Masonry, different texts. And this one, you can see here again, whatever your belief in God is, it's definitely above creation in most of the ancient texts' opinions. And I agree with that. And they say the souls are created way up here. There's no astrology up here. This is why I always get into arguments with astrologers. I say, hey, literally, we are not our astrology. We're not our sun signs, all this stuff. We are spiritual beings having a physical experience. And these two upper worlds are very high heavens. You could say the worlds of absolute is literally where the purified souls or pure souls dwell. And there might be some matrix of time elements up there that are in some kind of a structure like astronomy or astrology would be, but I don't think it's the same as anything we know here. This next world's down is Braya, which is also where the wisdom of the soul seems to be recaptured. This is very divine stuff. It's this big red line here where materialism begins. And again, if you talk to a physicist, or you go past the third grade, you're going to hear that molecules and atoms, well, especially atoms, are made up of positive and negative charges. Well, what is that? Well, that's energy. That's literally fixed in juxtaposition energies. The only difference between an atom of gold and the hair on your head is the amount of energetic buildup there is in the so-called electrons and protons and neutrinos and all the stuff that we're beginning to fully understand, right? And I don't know that we'll ever fully understand. And they literally say that the mother builds a garment for the soul to experience the physical world. This is really deep stuff. And when you think about that, it's actually quite profound. I don't know if I can zoom in on this thing. Yeah, you can see, yeah, here we go. So this will allow me to kind of zoom down here a little bit. And you can see here, quite interesting, because this diagram really suffices. That trap that the soul gets in, they say, is kind of recycling back and forth between the lower astral worlds and the, you could say, lower demonic worlds. And, people get trapped in all points in between. And this is really deep stuff, far beyond what even this diagram or any diagram could show. But we appear to, through the conscious mind, and this is where the religions I really agree with, the consciousness that we all have seems to have a huge effect, our conscious self-awareness, at how we escape from Alcatraz. So it's not only just karma, but it's also conscious awareness, what you believe, right? That's why George was right. It is a big club. They beat us over the head every day, telling us what to believe. And the more we become self-aware and conscious, the more we start leaping through these spiritual vessels known as sephirots on the tree of life. And this is what the Sharia Gilgam uses. And it's interesting because I had not read the Sharia Gilgam way before I constructed this diagram from other diagrams. So when I see something mentioned several times in different ways from different sources, you kind of say, there must be some truth to this, right? And this is very supported in many other ways. And again, quite interesting, because when you look at what happens on this planet and the insanity that goes on, and everybody's got an opinion, don't we? We all know, well, this is right, that's right, and that's why I always say, well, I don't know. I'm just a student of reality. And, astrology or astronomy, if you will, is the science of time. And the lower conscious mind is interacting with that, which is a lot different than, oh, you're a Pisces and Aries and you're locked in and you can't change. This is why you'll find many of the so-called, self-helpers or people working at expanding, your ability to navigate this world, always shied away a little bit from astrology. And yet I find the timing in astrology is so accurate, it's creepy, but it interacts with every one of us completely different. And this is when you get back to the world and all the stuff that's going on right now. This is humanity evolving on a never-ending scale. And all of us are being born and dying and all this and coming back and re-experiencing deep stuff. This is, like I said, the soul cauldron, stuck on spin cycle. And the egos and the water and the detergent is everybody's ego. So it's really wild, the free will. And it's certainly at play. And again, we see the power plays that are going on. So, it's really, an interesting thing. There's an old saying, we go crazy in congregations, we get better one by one. And there may be more truth to that than we know, even though there is value to sticking together, but it depends on who you're sticking together with, right? So I'm not getting political or anything like that. So anyways, I'm hearing a lot of different things here, or seeing a lot of different things coming through here. Yeah, someone says go to the ocean, the beach, and go on sunset. Yeah, there you go. I love it. The ocean has negative ions that actually discharges you. Large body of waters tend to do that, but I think there's nothing like the ocean with all the salt in it. I always used to say I think the ocean is a gigantic capacitor, and that's why maybe why the earth is surrounded by mostly water. I think it has a huge effect on discharging us. I know when I get within 5 miles of the ocean, I can feel it. It's really, really powerful. So, anyways, um, looking back here, so somebody, yeah, someone says here the insane analogy is too perfect. There, Jeff. Yeah, well, that's it. We're all drunk with our own beliefs, and that's why it's always positive to step back out. I wanted to mention something. Edgar Casey would say that colors are so important. And it's interesting, the color green always tends to be with nature and balancing. So having the colors of green in your home often helps. Also, the color gold, they say, is mimicking sunlight and creation. And, to have gold color around is good. I have played a lot in the past with Vastu. Vastu is probably the grandfather to Feng Shui, and it's very ancient. It comes out of Vedic astrology or Jyotisha, and really interesting. And this is the flow of energy in dwellings, whether it's a business place or a home. And I've been involved a lot with architects. I've actually helped design doctor's office and spiritual centers where we actually look at which way does the door face? Where is the sewage equipment? Where's the storage? Where's the entrances? Where does the daily activities go on in whatever dwelling it is, including your home? And it's really interesting that east-facing doors tend to bring the energy in. Now, obviously, if you look around the world, there's billions of places probably that face the west and other directions. But the east brings a flow in. And of course, you can go into a building to face the west and you'll still be alive and everything works. But you'll notice the energy flow isn't as good, and it tends to be a heavier energy. So there's all kinds of cool stuff with colors and Vastu that is really a lot of fun. So anyway, someone says here, somebody's saying dark daylight. They're saying, Jeff, what say you about the Aries moon today? I am an Aries. Well, the moon passes through every single sign. And you can't just look at the sign, but you also have to look at the aspects in the lunar mansions it's in. Now, tropical astrologers will definitely play with what tropical sign it is. So if we look at the sign today, that person must be looking at sidereal, right? Because today's new moon here. Now, let me just come back here. I have something here. I have to get up on my computer. I'm looking up at my screen here. So it depends on whether you're a tropical astrologer or siderealist. So right now, the moon is today, at least, is in sidereal Aquarius. It's right at the edge of the sign. It's at 29 degrees, 16 minutes. It's going to change into sidereal Pisces, probably within less than 45 minutes or so. I'd have to go time it. But a tropical astrologer is going to say, well, the moon right now is at the end of Pisces, you see. So it's at 23 degrees. Here, let me make sure I'm right. Yeah, it's at 23 degrees, 27 minutes. So this is the problem. You have to, so the moon's not in Aries yet. It's going to be in probably, give or take, about maybe 8-10 hours, something like that. I'd have to look at a calendar. But so I don't know where you're getting that it's in Aries today. To the full moon, when it finally comes up tomorrow, will be here. I can go back and look at that. Yeah, the full moon tomorrow is going to happen at, here, I'll tell you in 2 seconds here, in tropical at 14 degrees Aries, 8 minutes. But you see, that's a tropical zodiac. So you must be looking at tropical when you ask this question. Whereas the full moon will be tomorrow in Pisces. So, and it's going to be right in between both Rahu and here, let me come back. I moved my computer here. I call them computers, not computers. But let me get this back up here. So uh, that'll be, hang on, my computers are running away here. Yeah, I don't know. I can't get the computer to work. But it's very, very powerful. When you look at which zodiac it's in, you have to look at your chart with reference to which zodiac you're looking at. Otherwise, it gets way, way off. So let me come back here to my screen. So yeah, you can, you're almost better off getting your own astrology program. And many people jump on Astro Deets and they check things, but you want to look at the aspects it's making, and in the mundane, meaning what's it doing to other planets in the sky, as well as what is it doing to you. And again, it's not just as simple as the sign it's in. But anyways, this is why astrology is very heady. A lot of people study it and they go, "Oh my God, this is so complex," and they're right. It is. It's truly a matrix of energies that are never ever ending. Every single month, the moon will pass through every single sign, make every aspect to the chart, and everything else is moving too. So, and it's location dependent. Your birth chart is fixed. And depending on whether you're using Vedic astrology or sidereal or tropical, you're going to find that moon's going to make every aspect to everything in your chart. That's why the moon is really the stir stick. It really is in the soul cauldron, so I call it. And this is why the moon is also indicative of the lower conscious perception of reality in the Vedic astrology. The Egyptians looked at it that way too, and so do the Greeks. So interesting stuff. So anyways, someone's saying here, Trump, in Trump Towers, New York, he had the front door switch to a different street. Yeah. Oh, yeah. People are very aware of this stuff. Yeah, you bet. I mean, I cannot tell you. I've actually had people purchasing properties who didn't, because we couldn't get the aspects of the plumbing or the street or the electrical to come in at certain ways. So they went and bought a different piece of property. Now, that's, getting very technical, but yeah, the Vastu is absolutely stunning. It's something I've been studying many, many years. And the other cool thing I like about Vastu, that, and again, I'm not putting it over feng shui, but I find it's deeper from the standpoint that you can find no two people. It's like a pair of shoes. It's going to fit everybody a little bit different, right? And we all have different sizes. So you really have to fit it to your specific energy. And when you have multiple people coming in and coming out, whether it's a public building or a family, what have you, it's not going to fit everybody perfectly, but you can generally get the energy to be amazing. So it's a lot of cool stuff. So yeah. So anyways, that was the main thing that I wanted to push through, is that this full moon always brings things to an emotional crescendo. And this is a powerful one. It's not as powerful as the last two we've had. From one standpoint, we had eclipses before. You see, that September 6th new moon was very, very powerful. That, of course, brought the assassination of Charlie Kirk. We saw the reaction in the world, and it's also brought a lot of reaction in other parts of the world in different ways. So this eclipse is actually going to stay hot for a good 6 to 8 months from what I saw in its duration. And it's going to have a big effect on the world. And again, the big picture is the Uranus going back over the Pleiades. So this is the big one. And again, for anybody who hasn't listened before, just you might say, well, what does that mean? Well, last time we had Uranus transiting the Pleiades was in World War II. Time before that was in the United States, the Civil War. If we go back before that, Revolutionary War. And again, if you look back through history in Europe, all kinds of events were happening, even if Uranus wasn't discovered, you see, because again, people always say, well, yeah, but Uranus was only discovered, in the late 1800s. I'm like, okay, so what? Doesn't mean it wasn't there. Just because we didn't observe it, in a historical sense, it doesn't mean it wasn't there. That's like if the tree fell in the woods, was there a sound, right? Well, of course there was. If you weren't there to hear it, doesn't mean it didn't happen. It didn't happen for us, though. See, so that's the interesting thing about human perception of awareness. There's a lot of things going on right now that none of us know. And I can tell you that doesn't mean it isn't happening. It just means it's outside of our purview of our perception of reality. And that's the interesting thing. When you look at the lower conscious mind, it's actually an attenuator. And many intuitives have said that. Edgar Casey said that as well. Notice he had to lie down. He was called the sleeping prophet. If anybody reads that book, and I always mention this book a lot, it's one of my favorite books to mention, and it is called The Magus of Strovolos, right? So this was about a man in Cyprus, for anybody who's not familiar with. His nickname was Daskalos. And he would do the same thing. He could go into deep meditational trances and do astral travel. He actually had amazing powers. He could literally move objects. Now we start getting into ghosts and all this stuff, and why paranormal and all these things, telekinesis, so on and so forth. And this is all about the abilities to concentrate the lower conscious mind, expanding the lower conscious mind. It's a real gift that we all have, our conscious mind. It's also a curse when it haunts us with emotions and things that are happening to us, because a lot of us go through a heavy duty emotional stuff. And I always say, it was interesting how Hollywood promoted a drink and a cigarette, right? And it's drugs and alcohol really destroy the aura. And boy, I've had a purview of that. I had a recording studio for many years, and I, was around a lot of musicians and entertainers, and so many people's lives have been destroyed and are still being destroyed by drugs. And they're getting stronger and stronger, aren't they? All this stuff that's being mixed in. And I don't want to get into that whole subject, but my experience is it's the highway to hell. And it really breaks down the auric field and allows astral stuff to come in on you. Some people call them elementals. And this is why we see so much insanity in the world. And I think the demonic spirits have promoted that. I really do. So anyways, I want to take a look at a few of the comments here. And yeah, it's not a new moon. Someone's mentioning here, Laura Barber, she's saying today is a full moon. No, tomorrow is. It actually happens tomorrow at 8:48 p.m. It's the full moon. So yeah, if you look on a calendar, you can actually see it. So very, very powerful. And now she's got me questioning it. But yeah, definitely it's tomorrow. It is October 6th at 8:48 p.m. So very, very powerful. And I would say that, the biggest thing here, let me see if I can edit my chart up here. Yeah, the Vedic astrology is very, very interesting because there's something that enters into the equation known as the lunar mansions. And they are also known as the nakshatras, which are very, very important. Yeah, that full moon will happen. And I don't know why this thing flipped out here. Hang on, tools. My time change tools on, that's why. When you look at the lunar mansions, and this gets into the serpent of time, known as the Kala Chakra Dasha, which is really powerful stuff. And it actually shows how time is an infinite loop that is literally a matrix that bends our reality around. Now I got this up here. Yeah, tomorrow's full moon is going to happen in sidereal Pisces at 19 degrees 58 minutes in the lunar mansion of Revati. And that one is it's in what we call the first division of Revati. There's actually 4 divisions called padas. And this is going to happen in the nakshatra where Mercury and Venus and the moon all rule it. Again, logic and emotions, and full moons always bring a lot of tension. So, the biggest one I see here is that you may see more standoffs coming. And again, this is what we're seeing throughout the globe right now. And again, you can't just go by the full moon. You got to look at everything that's in. And it's a formidable, task for any astrologer to do. You got to approach it very humbly. But again, I look at the big background terrain right now is this Uranus coming to that conjunction of Alcyon. Plus, we've also got Saturn and Neptune coming to a conjunction in February. These are the big background energies right now that are extremely powerful. And the new and the full moons exacerbate or bring to conclusion some issues on that. But deep stuff. So, anyways, somebody is talking about something here about something strange happened in the past that made the masses of humans want to self-abuse, and it made it seem like it was a cool thing that the thing people are doing. Well, that's an interesting topic. Um, Here's where I would go back to, every religion, well, not every, but most of the uh, Christian, Judeo-Christian religions, as well as the Egyptian, Babylonian, and the Vedantic for sure, talks about this war in heaven. And now we get back into that diagram that I showed earlier. And this is an interesting topic because if I come back to that, I'm going to reshare my screen because that is a great diagram that can be used in so many ways as a reference to the complexities of this world. And here we go. So again, that is this diagram. And they say materialism was the creation of the fall of the spirits. They actually say these evil spirits were cast down. And this is what created the material physical worlds where spirit was enclosed into matter. And, this is deep stuff because when you look at the genetics, DNA, and the coding that we're in, and there's much lore out there about how our DNA has been shifted over mass times and some of the strings in the DNA are broken. Well, this might have to do with mass consciousness, and it also might have to do with the war between good and evil, trying to entrap the souls down here. In fact, the Sharia Gilgam, the text that I mentioned before, actually says the soul can get lost down here. And there's a real magic to the lower conscious mind. And I mention this a lot. See, the lower conscious mind is this that forms beneath this lower dashed line. Now, in the Aramaic and Hebrew, they refer to it as the nefesh. We just call it the lower conscious mind, right? I like to call it very similar to what Daskalos, the Magus of Strovolos, calls it, the present personality. The reason why it is mainly formed from birth forward. There is a mark that we all have beneath our nose, which is called the mark of silence. And if you look at that, that is the little cleft that we all have right there. See, right beneath the nose. And they say that blocks us or attenuates us from fully accessing all the spiritual parts of the upper layers of the soul, which are these that are referred to right here in this diagram. And the Rosh, or some people pronounce it Ruach, but I've always heard it Rosh. It is the spirit that bleeds down into the lower conscious mind. If you look at little kids, they're so playful. They're like little white sheets. They're just pure, but they have their personalities, don't they? And they have their traits that are very unique. There's no two kids alike, just like there's no two people exactly alike. And that might be the karmic energy that operates above that so-called subconscious mind barrier, which is also known in Vedic astrology as the karmic sheath represented by Saturn. So Saturn and the moon are definitely related to imprisoning the soul, but I think it's much more divine than we know. And it's also incumbent upon us to be consciously aware, because if you buy into the hatred, if you buy into someone provoking you and the depression and all the other stuff without logically trying to apply your conscious mind, you're probably going to go cuckoo, right? This is why there's so many people on medications and there's so many people in mass depression. And, sometimes we have reason to be depressed, don't we? I mean, the world is in a perfect place. But I always say the best place to stay, if you can, is in a state of gratitude. And anytime I think I got it bad, you know what I do? I look at the guy who doesn't or the woman who doesn't. You see him in the wheelchair. You see somebody with cancer. You see somebody who's sleeping under a bridge. If you got warm soap, water, a toothbrush, and a clean, warm bed, you're already so far above so many billions of people on this planet. Go take a trip to India once or China and look at how some of these poor people are living. And, in the United States, it's crazy here and they're trying to destroy it, but it is a amazing, amazing place. That's why everybody's trying to get here. And that's because it was founded on freedom, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution, and its core values are stunning. It really is. And, that's where you got to go sometimes. And, we're all comparing ourselves to Elon Musk and the billionaires, right? Oh, I want $1 billion. I want a jet. It's like Pink Floyd said, money. I want a football team, right? I actually used to work for a guy named Wesley Pavlon who had he had a basketball team. It was actually the Milwaukee Bucks. I helped on a crew build a house for him back in the 1970s. And talk about money. He had a Rolls Royce that played Bridge over River Kwai when he hit the horn. And I went, wow. He used to fly up to us in his jet helicopter from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And people may remember Lou Alcindor and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He was working with him a lot. And anyways, I can tell you, I don't care how much money you get, you're just like the rest of us. You're still going to have our daily needs to be met, our physical health, and the centering of the conscious mind. And that's interesting. And by the way, Wesley passed away not too long ago, an amazing man. And friend of mine, Andy Anderson, wrote a great book about him. Wesley he also created career academies. And the last I heard, he didn't take any money with him. Everybody I meet, I don't care how rich they get, they don't take nothing with them except this right here, the consciousness that we're born with and or created and allowed ourselves to create for our reality during this lifetime. So really cool. Yeah, somebody's mentioning time travelers here. And that's another interesting thing. Is time travel possible? My personal opinion is absolutely. I think that our government has been playing around with wormholes and gates or portals for a long, long time. In fact, there's lore that some of that stuff is the reason we went into Iraq originally. Remember that war with Iraq? All kinds of stuff. And there's also some very interesting things that I've watched on podcasts. I forget the gentleman's name, but I'll put him in the link here, about how many of these military installations around the globe may be covering up very mysterious places that may have everything from underground cities to portals in them. So interesting stuff. And it is interesting how all of the great cities of the past seem to be in deserts right now, isn't it? So a lot of upheaval and change that we don't fully understand on this planet is always going on. And reality is really a personal perception when you look at it. So a lot of stuff here. So the Wheel of Time. And that's the other thing too. I think books like I mentioned here, the Magus of Strovolos, raise consciousness by just being aware of them and studying this stuff. And the other ones I've mentioned many, many times is esoteric teachings and esoteric practices. This is a series of very advanced ways to learn to focus your mind, which is great stuff. It really is. I can't say enough about this stuff. And I myself always try and spend more time, and I don't spend enough time doing this stuff because it really strengthens the mind. And I got to tell you, the other one that I love, and I mention this one constantly, is the psychiatrist, Dr. Carl Wickland, who wrote the book 30 Years Among the Dead. And again, why this book is so significant is my opinion is it is absolute, unequivocal proof you and I do not die. Yes, the body does. But this book is full of 30 years of research. And this isn't the only book he wrote. Absolutely stunning. And what's, I think, so enlightening about this is no matter what the world's throwing at us and what the astrology says, it's an individual job to get your own conscious awareness more aware. Because if anybody thinks they're not going to check out of these bodies known as meat suits, I got another thing coming. It's an inevitability. We're only here for a very finite short time. It actually says in much of the biblical literature, we're like blades of grass and poof, we're cut down. And it says it in so many different documents. So true. The only thing you get to take with you is your opinions and your collective elemental belief systems, which is what psychology calls your beliefs. Daskalos and the Megas of Strovlos called them the thought form elementals that you've impregnated your auric field with, which comes out of the third eye chakra. So it's interesting. And I find, where's the astrology fit into all this? Well, it gives us the cycles in the cleansings. I get to see so many people going through so many different, diverse situations in their life. And isn't it interesting how the matrix of astrology shows those windows of time when these chapters and pages turn? And it's totally different for every one of us. That's what struck me about astrology. My mother actually turned this on to me in the mid 70s. And I went, yeah, come on, this stuff is, can't be proved, right? And then I started seeing that you can't prove or disprove astrology. And the reason you can't is because everyone's experiencing it uniquely. Why? Because we're all looking out at our lives through our own perception of reality. What is accurate in the astrology is how it interacts with each one of us in these phases. I always say God created time so everything wouldn't happen at once. And I'm really convinced that that's probably true. It's an unfoldment in the perception of reality of time. And I think there's many dimensions and many other planets that probably have totally different time frames than this one. That's actually mentioned in the Sharia Gilgam lightly. There's other rabbinical texts that get into that, and there's a lot of Vedantic texts that talk about that too. The Rig Veda is a most interesting text, very, very ancient. And again, this is all subject to the translator's opinions of what it says, but it certainly indicates that. Interesting stuff. So anyways, somebody's saying here they went through a rainbow tube of light on top of Machu Picchu in Peru. Yeah, that's a cool place. I asked, where does this go? And a voice said, Alcyon. Ah, wow. Now that's really cool. So I'm reading a comment here, and that's really cool. Somebody named Zuvuya. So cool. Yeah. I haven't been to Machu Picchu, but I've talked to people who have. They say it's profound. You see, there's portals. We're all looking for physical stuff, but there are astral portals that I believe are extremely powerful on this planet. And again, I think we're on an ascension. Over the next couple thousand years, all this white noise of everything that's happening will always be subject to creation. No matter how evil it gets, no matter how much destruction there is, and how many people die, the souls keep raining down into creation. And, if you go back and you look at that diagram that I showed earlier, you'll notice divinity is at the top and the fallen spirits or evil ones are at the bottom, and they're kept there. So that's one ubiquitous thing that seems to show up, because if they weren't kept there, I don't think we would be drawing breath right now or having this conversation that we're having. So you got to look at divinity. Creation never stops. Something dies, something's born. Everything's in a state. They say everything under the physical world will be born, it will grow, it will mature, experience, and it will pass away back into dust, right? Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So it's where all these old terms came from. But what keeps on, and for the most part is indestructible, is the soul and the spirit, as long as we don't go into some very negative stuff. And the Sharia Gilgam actually warns about that. How if we immerse ourselves too deep into the evil areas, you can lose the soul. And we hear about some of the hideous stuff that is always kept secret, right? This is why, maybe that's why they're not releasing the Epstein files. It'll expose too much evil with too many people, and these judges mysteriously are the ones holding it back. So interesting stuff. And there's a lot more we don't hear about that goes on. Very mysterious stuff here with some of this underground stuff. So deep, deep stuff. So anyways, I got to run here. I can only stay just about this amount of time. But some great comments people are bringing through, and I wish again I had more time at which to answer them. But yeah, so yeah, that's really cool about the. Here's one I want to catch here. Someone's saying, "Why would people think there is no point to this incarnation? Clearly, we are here to learn and advance the soul, as you are saying." Yeah, that's exactly right. This is one ubiquitous thing, no matter how much dogma you get in whatever religious or spiritual thing, because we're all going to get a little ego, right? Everybody's going to have their opinion. But the ubiquitous thing is, yeah, we're all spiritual beings having a physical experience. And it's interesting in astrology, this is something I do in every reading. I look very carefully at what was the exact degree that you were born on in the sidereal zodiac at the moment and second you draw first breath. Now, it's hard to get that because if you've ever been in a delivery room, it's kind of busy in there, right? So I was very blessed to be in the delivery room when my son was born. And I'd always heard this legend that the spirit, psyche, and soul is attached permanently or tied in permanently, is the better word, at first breath. And breath is synonymous with spirit. In fact, I got a challenge for you. Try not breathing for a little while. You won't be here. So, the breath, we never think about that. They actually say in the Vedantic literature, the amount of breaths that you will take is measured. Isn't that interesting? And you think about how many times we have breathed since we were, exited the womb in the delivery room. It's astounding. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of times, millions actually. So by the time we draw last breath, right? So what's interesting is that all of these religions get to focusing on what are we here for? And there's a lot of truth to that, even though you'll get a lot of dogma and a lot of varied opinions. There's a lot of truth. The Sharia Gilgam is a most interesting text, especially if you read between the lines on it. There's not another text that has structure like that. Even the Vedantic stuff, as good as it is, it's not laid out in a structure quite that defined. Though I would say the Upanishads are. The Upanishads are different, just no one's diagrammed them quite to the degree that the Sharia Gilgam has. And if you study the Magus of Strovolos, 30 Years Among the Dead, just among a few books, you'll find there's an amazing correlation that fits in to this whole journey of the soul, which is really what it's all about. The dashas are absolutely stunning in the Vedic astrology. And so is the Kala Chakra dasha, which is the infinite figure eight loop of time. And that one's, I'll never be able to figure that out 100%. I don't think anyone will. It's the infinite loop of time. And they say the worlds get destroyed every 4 billion something years. They say like 4.3 billion years in the Vedas. No one's 100% sure. But how many times could someone incarnate in 4.3 billion years? And they say all of creation, not just the earth, might get destroyed. It's like a big grenade, but boom. And it either contracts or expands at that point. And it may go through cycles of that. We don't know. I certainly don't know. There's no definitive texts that say what exactly happens. That might be a very interesting divine decision that we are not a part of collectively. The one thing that's very interesting, the soul seems to come here and the earth seems to be a place where purification and rectification and consciousness are definitely happening. And when we exit these bodies, I think the more we just become aware of that possibility, the more we're probably going to act more consciously intelligent, which is a very interesting thing to look at. And again, if you talk to 1,000 people, you're going to get 1,000 different opinions, right? I know I get it all the time. Some people, you guys are very kind on my channel. I get a lot of nice compliments, and I really appreciate that. But I also get some people, well, I disagree. Well, that's right. We all have a right to disagree. That's free speech, right? And it's very interesting to examine this mysterious element of life, existence, and who we really are. Because our parents named us, but the soul, I've been doing these, and I mention this a lot, but I have to tell you, let me put this back up here. These are very interesting. These angels that I talk about, put the same picture back up. So you can see here, there is 7 letters, and this was derived from the person's birth chart. And I'm now putting these on little pendants as well. I can engrave them in there. And really amazing, the caster I'm working with. And what is most important about this is it's not just your angel, but it has gematria, which is numerology that actually shows what your soul root might be attached to in terms of previous incarnational places, like the king you were descended from, the place, or more importantly, it'll get into what you may have done, like you were a metal worker, you were this, you were that, or you came from this tribe. It's absolutely can't make this stuff up. And this all comes from the ancient Psalms and the 5 books of Moses, which is also many people know as the Torah. There's also something called the Tanakh, which is the 24 books of the prophets and the writings. And, Christians say, well, wait a minute, what about the New Testament? Well, remember the New Testament, it was actually said, I do not come to change the old law. I come to fulfill it. See, so there's nothing that disputes any of that in either the New or the Old Testament, particularly the New. So, without getting into religions, because that's just like politics, isn't it? But it's profound stuff. And you can't make this stuff up. And it just kind of blows my mind sometimes. It takes me a lot of time to do the not only calculation, but also the correspondence. I give 3 sheets with these pendants that actually list out the connections of your soul to various different points. And see, there's ciphers and codes that have been long lost. I have all the ciphers and we certainly have all the codes, but there's nobody drawing breath that fully understands the complexity of the matrix of this solar system from a spiritual standpoint. See, this gets into some really deep stuff. The 72 angels, the 24 wings of the wind, all this stuff is alluded to in the Psalms and various different things. And a lot of the people playing in the magical communities know what I'm talking about. And it's very complex matrix, and it's very divine. And it seems to show that there is a free will factor that's balancing on this good and evil, which is very interesting stuff. So again, it places emphasis on free will. The astrology places emphasis on time. But see, it doesn't make you think or be a certain way. See, so that's interesting stuff about astrology. And I always like to point that out. Don't look to your astrology to tell you what to do. Look to your astrology to guide you what to do. It's about guidance, you see. Then that way, you're the decision maker. You're the driver of the car. You don't let your speedometer tell you how fast to go. You look at your speedometer, see how fast you're going. You see what I'm saying? Or your RPM or whatever. That's the more, I think, logical way to use it. And astrology's gotten so, I think, far off because people don't understand it. They think it's some magical woo-woo. And that's why the religions, some of them were very violent, I guess. Oh, it's the work of the devil, right? Well, it's the work of the devil if you don't use it the right way. You got to use common sense with it, or you could say, put it logically forward. Then that's where, it really puts an emphasis on our own inner ability to rationalize. And that is a trait that I think we all have that is so divine. And it's amazing when you stop and think about it. So with that, I got to run. And everybody, thanks for joining me. And again, excellent comments. I wish I had many more times here to answer them all, but really some great comments here. Someone's mentioning here, it's earth, heart, death, breath, the great mother of the spiritual awakening. Yeah, the earth is an amazing place. I always say, I love the human race. It's just the people that drive me nuts sometimes, right? It's all of our egos. And, when you get away from that and just look at the essence of life, animals, people, plants, minerals, it's pretty stunning. It's a pretty stunning place. There's no scientist drawing breath that could create this. Modify it, play with it, mimic it. Yeah, but they'll never create it. So with that, I got to go. And everybody have a good day and enjoy the full moon. You can also make the full moon be powerful in manifestation of emotions, setting goals. See, so it doesn't have to be bad or good. It's energy. It's how we direct it that matters. So many blessings, everybody. And I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.